Hello everyone, I'm Brian. Today I'm reacting to Reincarnation, Rebirth, Life After Life, and Past Life Evidence. So this was a request. I do a request. If you have a request, please leave the title of the video, the channel name, the link in the comments below, because if you leave the link, it might more than likely will be put on hold for review by YouTube. So anyways, I think this was in response to trying to understand how Atman works in Buddhism, which I believe they call it Anatman, which is, I'm not sure. Again, I'm still fairly new into Buddhism and trying to learn it in terms of the videos, in terms of my reactions. So let's go ahead and get started. Link in the description for the video.
Hi everyone, welcome to The Enthusiastic Buddhist. In this episode I'm going to be looking at the topic of reincarnation, rebirth and past life evidence. Rebirth, multiple lives, life after death. Do you believe in it? Have you or anyone you know had a past life experience? Are you skeptical? Are you looking for more scientific proof before you consider it a possibility? Rebirth is an interesting topic and there are many people who believe in it. Before studying Buddhism, I was neither on the side of being a believer or a non-believer. I was looking for more proof that it was an actual possibility, and I happened to come across some things that opened my mind more to the idea of rebirth, which is what I want to share with you in this video. Rebirth is an important topic in Buddhism because the concept of rebirth underlies a lot of the Buddha's teachings, but I should stress that you don't need to believe in rebirth and multiple lives to study and practice the Buddha's teachings. It's not some kind of prerequisite. There are many aspects of the Buddha's teachings that people can benefit from without needing to have a belief in rebirth, such as practicing meditation, doing meditations on loving kindness and compassion, and studying Buddhism's rich philosophy. But getting back to whether rebirth exists or not, the most compelling evidence I feel that supports the idea of multiple lives is the research being done on past life recollection. I've always been interested in the possibility of recalling past life memories, but the closest I've come to having one is only knowing someone in my family who's had one. The interesting thing about past life recollection is that they can happen to us whether we're religious or not, and that can even happen when we're just going about our everyday lives. A family member of mine had a vivid past life recollection, though not being a believer in rebirth, he couldn't say whether it was a past life recollection or not, and he didn't want to be identified in this video, but he was happy for me to share his story, and this is what he told me.
I would hope that she has proof in terms of this recollection, because, you know, I mean, our mind is very strange. It makes up stories even when we don't want it to. Think about their dreams. Those are not real, but they can seem like past life stuff. So if she can somehow, this person recollects a past life and then she goes and verifies it, and this person has never read a story about this past life, that's pretty amazing. And again, like I said, there's this one channel, I haven't watched it in a little bit, but this channel talks about this lady that recollects her past life and was able to recollect a lot of things that they've yet to dig up, and then I think they discovered this place and she explained everything, and as they're digging it up, everything was how she explained it, which was, it's very crazy.
He was visiting the city of Sydney for a meeting, and he was staying in a motel that was a short ferry ride from where the meeting was being held. One afternoon, when he was returning back to his motel, he missed the ferry that he would normally have taken, so he decided to take another ferry from a different part of town. The ferry he then had to take was a small vintage ferry which only carried about 30 people or so. It wasn't one of the larger, newer models. Now, everything was completely normal until it was his turn to step onto the gangplank to board the ferry. The instant he stepped onto the gangplank, he was transported into the early to mid 1940s. He could see that he was wearing the blue uniform of the Royal Australian Air Force, and that the people in front of him on the gangplank were dressed in 1940s clothing, including men in uniforms. Now, the state only lasted for a few seconds, but it was crystal clear, and the memory has stayed with him for over 30 years. He told me that by far the strangest aspect was the feeling he experienced in that instant. Though he's absolutely certain he's never been on that wharf before, having never lived in Sydney before, the moment he stepped onto that gangplank, he had this overwhelming sensation that he was home, that he knew this place, just as he imagined an Air Force pilot would feel if he was returning home from overseas. He said of all the impressions he retained of the experience, it was this feeling that he knew this place, that he belonged there, and that he was home, which has stayed with him for over 30 years, and yet home was an entirely different city in Australia altogether. These stories might sound interesting, right? But we want more proof before we start believing in past life recall and rebirth. Fortunately, there are some scientists who have dedicated their lives to studying past life recall and assessing the accuracy of the person's claims. There's one scientist named Dr. Jim Tucker, who's the author of the book Life Before Life. He conducted 40 years of scientific investigation into children of past life memories. In particular, he was interested in children who remembered precisely who they'd been, where they'd lived, and who had birthmarks on their bodies that matched the fatal wounds of the people they claimed to have been in their past life.
Okay, so one of my earlier videos with Lakhani and Rebirth, I edited out a certain section because I said a little bit too much about myself there. So I have a birthmark, and I think Lakhani talked about how that's evidence of, well, I don't know evidence per se, but you know, that's basically birthmarks are I guess wounds from your past life. I think it makes me think of all these other people who have really, like, I guess you could say big birthmarks. I was watching one YouTube video, and this guy who does edits on pictures, you know, a lot of people send in a request, hey, can you edit this out, edit that out, and he just kind of makes funs of the pictures, you know, like, can you edit out my, can you edit shoes on my feet because I forgot my shoes, and he give him like clown shoes or something like that. But there's this one picture where it says this guy showed like a big, what looks like a birthmark going across his face, and it was pretty massive, and he said, could you edit out my birthmark? I feel self-conscious about it. And well, it just makes me think, dude was probably a warrior that got gashed with a sword or something across his face, and that's what I thought whenever I saw that picture. I was like, dude, that looks freaking cool. You know, it looks really cool. And the guy replied, the guy said, I'm not gonna. He said, don't be ashamed of the way you look. You know, that birthmark actually looks pretty cool to me. And I was like, I agree. And but yeah, I don't know if everyone has a birthmark. And that would be quite interesting if birthmarks are evidence of, like, maybe how you died in your past life. I guess if you have no birthmark, you just died of natural causes, I suppose.
For example, a child from Sri Lanka, almost 3 years old, began telling in detail about her previous life as a male incense seller. She remembered the village she'd lived in, which was 145 miles from where she was currently living, the brand of incense he'd sold, which wasn't a brand that was readily available in her town, the names of his wife, daughter and school, and she remembered he had died colliding with a large vehicle. When one of the girl's teachers went in search of such a person who had lived, they found someone who died 2 years before this girl was born who fit that very description. In fact, when the two families, that of the deceased girl that of the deceased man and the young girls met, they found that many of the statements were accurate and that the birthmarks on her chest and ribs matched the exact location of the fatal wounds that were shown on the man's autopsy when he'd been hit by a truck. And this wasn't an isolated case. After 40 years into this kind of research, Dr. Jim Tucker concluded that reincarnation or rebirth was the most plausible explanation for the thousands of cases he studied. Now you're probably wondering how something in our previous life could affect our body in this life, right? Well, I guess it really comes down to the important connection between our bodies and our minds.
Before she gets past that part, it makes me wonder, like, so if we have a birthmark, in our next life, will that birthmark transfer over, or is birthmark only being transferred over from what happened in your previous life? Because if birthmarks transfer over and over and over and you die many different ways, you're going to be covered head to toe in birthmarks eventually. But I have a feeling, I think it's how you died in your previous life. That's if you died like with a wound, because of a wound, that's the birthmark that you'll get, as opposed to passing down of birthmarks, how you died in previous life. Though everyone's gonna be covered in birthmarks eventually, if that's the case.
Studies have shown that the mere suggestion of trauma can create physical reactions in our bodies. For instance, when some people were asked to re-experience the trauma of being tied up, deep indentations resembling rope marks actually appeared on their arms. And again, in other studies, people produced boils just when the mere suggestion of being burnt was made. So these sort of studies suggest that the mind is powerful enough to produce actual physical changes in our body. So therefore, if rebirth does exist, then it's possible that traumatic fatal wounds could have such an impact on the mind that those imprints could produce changes in our future physical body, thus resulting in corresponding birthmarks on us. Now, the important thing about past life memories is that when people have them, it isn't like having some kind of vague memory as if they were daydreaming. These memories are said to be vivid and clear, as if we were re-experiencing the event again. People who have had past life memories, or even memories from when they were still in the womb or as a baby infant, also have this unshakable certainty that the event actually happened, and it wasn't just something that they created in their own minds. For instance, Ajahn Brahm, a monk and abbot of the monastery in Western Australia, wrote in his book Mindfulness, Bliss and Beyond about recollecting a childhood experience after one of his meditations. He was surprised to find himself remembering being in his pram as a baby, smelling the familiar smell of the pram, and even seeing the blue toy pig that he had had. He said of the experience that while he was sitting there as a 40-plus-year-old monk, he was remembering with extreme clarity the details of being a newly born infant, and there wasn't even the slightest bit of doubt that he was recalling an event from his early childhood.
Okay, that's kind of weird because, I can recollect one thing from my not I wouldn't say childhood, my infanthood, I suppose. Um, but I don't know if I don't know if my mind's just making this up or I actually recollect it. And I don't remember how old. I think I was maybe under a year, maybe under 2 years, under a year old. And I remember it's not necessarily vivid. I do remember it. Well, hold on. Let me just say this. I have a memory of it now. Whether it's because I remember that scenario, or more than likely the case, is because there's a picture that was taken. And when I look at that picture, I don't know whether my mind's imagining me seeing through the eyes from the perspective of where I was at when I was under less than a year old, or whether I remember looking through, because the only thing I remember was my dad holding up a thing in front of me, and he's just doing up and down like that, and then I saw a picture of, from my mom's perspective, taking the picture. And I looked at it, it's like, now I don't know whether I saw the picture first and then my mind just created that memory out of nowhere, or whether I did in fact remember it. Remember from that perspective, remember me seeing that. That's the only thing I could remember from a child. So that was kind of weird when she said that. But then again, did I just make up that memory because I saw the picture? I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. Huh, that's funny.
He said that the event was a complete surprise to him and it changed his view about memory. And this kind of certainty is emphasised again and again in the books written by Dr. Brian Weiss. He's a psychiatrist who was initially very sceptical about reincarnation or rebirth, but when one of his patients started experiencing past life memories in his office, and as a result not only did her present day problems begin to disappear, but she was able to disclose private details of Dr. Weiss's life, he became a believer in multiple lives. In his first book, Many Lives and Many Masters, tells the story of his first and profound encounter with this patient. One of his following books, Messages from the Masters, is full of many extraordinary cases of people recalling vivid past life memories, as well as the stage in between lives. I really highly recommend reading these books. Now, near-death experiences are also another topic that lends weight to the idea of multiple lives. Near-death experiences are still a mystery to science. A lot of near-death experiences that have been documented, people talk about a stage after death when they're surrounded by light, they feel love, and sometimes a wiser being meets with them to help determine what important lessons that they've learnt in their life.
Yeah, so The light, I think some doctors have an explanation for that. They say that it's your I guess maybe your neurons are no longer firing, so you see just this last little bit of light. Also, a lot of people say they see their family, or they flash back through their life and kind of relive their life entirely, their entire life in like a half a second or a second or something like that. But I mean, I guess a couple of things to say there for me is the fact that our mind is actually quite remarkable. I just theory here, just theory here. I think our mind can process information quite rapidly. I think so. Basically, it recollecting our entirety of the memory of our life. It can recollect each individual snapshot of our life like really quickly, faster than we can think of these things. It's just that I guess maybe our minds maybe slow down so that we can comprehend what's going on, maybe. Otherwise, it's just a big blur when we're conscious of what our mind is doing. Yeah, if our mind's just processing all the data, and if we're trying to find out what our mind's doing, it's just a big blur because everything is going by so quickly. So the mind has to slow down for us to comprehend what's going on. So when we think for a very long time, and our mind just sits there idle for the most part, and just shows the image, kind of like a computer, where the computer can do like thousands of processes a second, but whenever we operate something, we operate in the speeds that we can click on something or type something. The computer can type an entire book in less than a second, while us it takes us a couple of days to type up those books because we're just slow compared to the CPU or the machine. Same thing with our mind, I think.
So these accounts suggest that our lives are here opportunities to grow and to learn to love. They also suggest that death is just a transition between lives and it's not something to be scared of. The concept of rebirth really broadens our perspective of life. It gives us a bigger picture. If we do have more than one life, what value are we placing on this one right now? What kind of journey are we on? Do we value material wealth more than spiritual gain or developing ourselves as an individual? I certainly don't remember ever reading about a higher being asking the person after death, so how much money did you make? And then saying, well, that's not enough, you're going to have to go back.
Uh, you know, yeah, you got to go back and you got to work up that interest too. It's like 12% right now, but inflation and everything, so you're looking at about 24% in interest. So go back down, work harder, and then I'll see you in 5 years. I meant I'll see you in a few years.
Now, if we look at the Buddhist perspective on rebirth, the Buddha stated without hesitation that we have had multiple lives and that our rebirths aren't just random, that there is a reason for them. The Buddha gave the name samsara to this perpetual wandering of ours from life to life. Samsara can also be translated as cyclic existence, and the reason for our continual rebirths is because we haven't yet figured out a way how to free ourselves from it. When the Buddha became enlightened under the Bodhi tree in Bodh Gaya in India, he saw that sentient beings have had countless lives. He also saw that the experiences we have during our lives are determined by the good and bad karma that we previously created. Now, out of compassion, the Buddha wanted to see all beings reach a state where they no longer had to experience birth and death and all the potential sufferings that could be experienced during our lives. There's a sutra, or also known as a discourse, where the Buddha points out to his disciples, who were mostly monks at that time, that rebirth happens, and that after all the suffering we've experienced, aren't we ready to look for freedom and enlightenment? The Buddha said, "Long have you repeatedly experienced the death of a father, the death of a brother, the death of a sister, the death of a son, the death of a daughter, loss with regard to relatives, loss with regard to wealth, loss with regard to disease. The tears you have shed over loss with regard to disease while transmigrating and wandering this long, long time, crying and weeping for being joined with what is displeasing, being separated from what is pleasing, are greater than the water in the four great oceans." And he continues, "Long have you thus experienced stress, experienced pain, experienced loss, swelling the cemeteries, enough to become disenchanted with all fabricated things, enough to become dispassionate, enough to be released." So in that last verse, the Buddha is really saying that after all these repeated rebirths and repeated suffering, shouldn't we now be tired and be looking for some release, which is to gain enlightenment and experience ultimate happiness and freedom? So it was this path to ultimate happiness that the Buddha spent his entire life teaching about. He pointed out that there were two paths. One is the path that leads to worldly gain, and the path that leads to deathlessness, eternal bliss, is the other. The Buddha never denied that there was happiness to be found in this world. He very much encouraged wholesome relationship, friendships, etc. But the problem he could see was that any worldly happiness or pleasure that we found is fleeting and impermanent and cannot bring the everlasting happiness that we're all desperately trying to seek. In fact, it was because of his own realization of the impermanent nature of worldly happiness which catapulted him into a life of deep meditation and contemplation in order to find a path to happiness which he discovered through his own enlightenment. So everything the Buddha taught was to ensure that we created causes for our own enlightenment, which means practicing meditation, practicing virtue, creating good karma, increasing our wisdom, and generating the pure feelings of love and compassion to all. Then by doing all this, we can effectively increase our spiritual level to a point where we can end the cycle of rebirths and even choose to be reborn or not, instead of being at the mercy of experiencing any rebirth and all the sufferings that could be part of it. So are we believers of rebirth? Well, I'll provide you with some links below to the books I mentioned in this video so you can check them out for yourselves. I know after reading these books I was much more open to the possibility of past lives or rebirth. And I think in some ways it's nice believing in past life or future lives because it means that we're never really parted from our loved ones for very long.
I guess, okay, this makes sense a little bit in terms of having past life. Because in Advaita Vedanta, memory and all of that stays with the body. It doesn't, oh God. Oh, that's kind of a little confusing, but anyways, as far as I heard, memory and all of this stays with the body in Advaita Vedanta. So, I'm sorry. This is something Sadhguru said actually. And Swami Sarva Priyananda also, that the Turiya is untouched by, uncorrupted, untouched, ever so pure in your mind, untouched by memory or emotion. It is pure. It is absolute. So in terms of when you pass away, again, I'm kind of, I guess, a little bit lost in terms of this in Advaita Vedanta, whether your memory follows you, or whether the memory just stays with the body, and once the body dies, your Turiya goes to another body, and it's just wiped clean of the memory of the past. And it's only confusing there because the fact that your body is still Brahman as well. You know, so there's no separation between your Turiya and your body, because both those things are Brahman. They're all the same thing. But hold on, sorry. So now if I look at it in terms of Swami Sarva Priyananda, how he's saying, if we say Brahman is the definition of all existence, not limited by existence, all objects, not limited by objects, and all space, not limited by space. Or all time, sorry. Time instead of existence. All time, all objects, all space, and not limited by any of those. Then I can believe, it makes it a little bit easier to understand how. Does it make it easier to understand our consciousness? I don't know. Ever since I started thinking about Brahman in that way, it's I definitely need to think about it a lot more. I don't know, that definition that Swami said makes sense. That everything is Brahman, very much sure. But I guess I need to rethink things with what is Brahman, with how Swami has said it. I've thought about it a little bit, but I definitely need to think about it a lot deeper than what I've had. And ever since that definition, it kind of changed my thoughts on what Brahman is, because again, I've said before that to me Brahman seemed to be this, some people seem to see Brahman as a deity, some people see Brahman as this inanimate object, and as this pure consciousness. And that's it. That's all Brahman is, pure consciousness. Which everything in this universe is pure consciousness, which is practically the same thing as what Swami has said, but he doesn't say that it's pure consciousness. He says that it's all objects, all space, and all time. The infinite. But saying something is all objects, all space, all time, not limited by those, doesn't make it consciousness though. So that's where it is. Okay, so there's three things. So one, some people have said made it almost seem like Brahman's a god. The other made it seem like Brahman is pure consciousness and everything is made out of this consciousness. So our bodies, all objects, all time, all space. And then Swami says that Brahman is the infinite, all objects, all time, all space, but doesn't say it is consciousness though. So that the big separation between those two versus this third one, basically these two, was one says it's consciousness and the other one does not. I can't remember if Swami said that Brahman is pure consciousness too. I believe he has, but then again, looking back, I don't know if he's talking about a different subject, a different way of life, or is he talking about Advaita Vedanta? I think he was talking about Advaita Vedanta at that time. Oh man, I'm almost getting in terms of confusion a little bit on that. But I'll be watching more for sure to try to really clear things up. And again, I think it's because of that was it definition of God by Swami, that he didn't say anything about pure. I don't remember in that video if he said it was pure consciousness at all. And maybe the video was shortened to just that specific subject, and maybe earlier in the video or later on a video outside of that cut, he does say it is pure consciousness then.
Means that we'll meet them again in a future life. And I know I've met some people in this life who I felt that I've known before in previous lives, and perhaps some of you can relate to that. And I also put a link below to a short YouTube video, which is a short Fox 8 news story about an American boy who had vivid recollections of fighting with the Japanese in World War II. So let me know what you thought of this video. Please like the video if you found it interesting or informative. Give it a thumbs up either up here or down here, depending on where you're watching this from. And make sure you subscribe to my channel for future videos. And if you want to read more, check out my website, enthusiasticbuddhist.com. And let me know in the comments below what you think about the concept of rebirth. Do you believe in it? What sort of evidence would you consider convincing? And definitely let me know if you or anyone you know has had a past life experience. I would absolutely love to read about it. So that's all from me. Take care everyone, and I hope to see you in the next episode.
Okay, so I actually went to her channel. I think the last video she posted was a year ago. So I hope she continues. She has a lot of subscribers, so I'm not exactly sure what she's doing. I hope she's doing okay. Again, her video will be in the description below if I remember, which I will, hopefully. And I'm going to check out those other videos after this one. That's interesting. I want to see that Fox video she's talking about the kid that remembers fighting in World War II. And also to look up that person. Let me see if I can go back there real quick.
Who's the author of the book Life Before?
Jim Tucker. I think that's the right one, right? One scientist named Dr. Jim Tucker, who's author of the book. Yeah, he's the one that did the scientific research. I definitely got to check that out too. Do I believe in rebirth? No. But again, generally speaking, for me, everything is in the negative, as I don't believe in it. But that doesn't mean I'm not open to it. It's just do you believe this exists? No. Do you think it could exist? Yes, it's possible. I'm not saying it's impossible for it to exist, but just based on what I know right now, do I know that it exists? I do not know that it exists. Do you believe that it exists? No, because I've not experienced it. So I know some people saying, just say you don't know. Yes, I don't know. That's always the case, though. Whenever I don't know something, it's always the case. But it's just whether I believe in it more or do I believe in it less kind of deal for me. All right, so I'm gonna check out that video, those videos. I definitely gotta check out that Fox video. I gotta look up that guy because this is again interesting. And plus, again, that other video, I can't remember, Mr. Ballin. He had this one video where this lady recollects her past life in Egypt. So there's quite a large time gap there between her current life and her Egyptian life, and she was able to recall like what everything looks like. So that's interesting. That is very interesting. I said this in another video too about Rebirth, I do believe. But anyways, if you want to check it out, it'll be in the description below. If you like my content, please consider subscribing. Thumbs up, thumbs down below. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next vid.